Hi, my name is Roxanne Russell. I've been teaching in college classrooms for 20 years and 12 of those years online. And in this video, I would like to share with you some of the things I've learned about asynchronous discussion as part of the online learning experience. I was a freshman composition teacher for 8 years before the first time I taught online, and I was very impressed with the way an asynchronous discussion board allows students to use writing for conversation. And that has helped me envision the asynchronous discussion board as a powerful learning tool. In this video, I will go over some of the benefits of asynchronous discussion, the challenges of asynchronous discussion, and how you can design your asynchronous discussion plans to mitigate some of those challenges and get more benefits. You can use groups, prompts, threads, and your own pattern of responses to get more powerful results. And finally, I'll go over a few things about how the discussion board offers a unique chance for metacognition in the classroom. After years of trying to convince people how interesting and fun asynchronous discussion boards can be, it has been exciting to see more and more faculty who have had the opportunity to teach online and experience these benefits. Things that I hear mentioned often and the things that I've experienced myself are that one major benefit is it gives students time to prepare substantive answers. They can bring more critical thinking and problem-solving skills to their responses than they can in the classroom because they've had time to prepare them. They also may have ready resources they can point their peers to, be able to make an attachment or send them to a web link that helps them have a more sustainable response to the prompt by taking it outside of the classroom. An asynchronous discussion can also help a student and you see the recorded steps of their learning process. You can see students move from certain types of understanding to new types of understanding in a way that's recorded, and in classrooms that's not always the case. The participation requirement, although this is something we see listed in syllabi for face-to-face classrooms, it's much harder to quantify. Whereas in the asynchronous discussion board, you're able to see and know how many times students have responded, how much quality you find in those responses, and whether or not they're doing it in the time that is appropriate for the topic. Along with these benefits of asynchronous discussion are the inevitable challenges. The most frequently noted challenge of asynchronous discussion is the burden of reading so many posts, both for the students and for the facilitator. They add up quickly, the participation requirement is there, and therefore there are many to read. And often, even if it is quality discussion, it can be repetitive or it can seem unnecessary to read that many responses in order to have a good learning experience. There's also the chance for misinterpretation of tone or meaning from each other in this text-based conversation environment. The reason I've chosen the icon of the flame here is because that is always the fear, is that there might be some flame of emotions that ends up turning the conversation to a negative place. Even if those places aren't negative, you will also find that participants in an asynchronous discussion can get off on tangents that are clearly far away from the learning objectives, learning goals, or even learning sphere of what the class should be about. So these tangents can take the class off course and may take up attention that wouldn't be taken up in a face-to-face classroom because people might rein themselves in. And finally, what can be most frustrating in an asynchronous discussion is to find those students who don't participate in a substantive way and just give cursory responses like I agree or that sounds good, and not bring any examples, personal experience, citations from the readings that have been going on that week, and don't bring any substance to the conversation. What I would like to offer you today are some strategies for your asynchronous discussion board design that can help you maximize those benefits and minimize the challenges of the asynchronous discussion board. Three primary ways that you can do this in the way that you design your asynchronous discussion board is through groups, the types of prompts you use, and the way you thread the conversations. Another way that you can address asynchronous discussion board challenges and maximize the benefits is through your own personal response patterns. So let's go back and start with groups. One way to create an atmosphere that will have a lower reading burden for your students, not necessarily for you, would be to form smaller groups for conversations. This can be done by having small private groups where they might be sharing and discussing information and or projects together that's not shared with the rest of the class. Or this could be a design that has a discussion leader where you assign different students in the class to be the ones who are providing the primary prompt and or leading the discussion of a prompt that you have designed for smaller groups, but allows the entire class to cross those discussion leader groups. Or you could decide that you want to have an entire class participate in one conversation, and yet you want to group the conversation by the different types of questions that are used and only require participation in certain parts of those groups. In addition to using prompts as a good grouping strategy, it's also very important that your prompts be well designed to elicit good responses and, of course, good learning. One thing to think about is that you're an expert, but you should think like you're a novice. What have you learned recently that can remind you what it is like to be learning something for the first time? What was your approach, and what did you need to know in order to move forward? A discussion board is a good place to focus on your learning objectives and look for places where there might be pre-existing misconceptions or preconceptions that you can help the class move past quickly by writing strong discussion prompts. One of the first pieces of advice I received about writing asynchronous discussion board prompts was to make sure that they were open-ended. So of course you don't necessarily want students to be able to just say yes or no. However, I learned as I went through the process of facilitating discussions that prompts that are open-ended can also leave room for people to get off on tangents. So it's also really a good idea to design such a good discussion prompt that you may elicit the requirement that the student actually make a choice, a yes or no decision, or make some sort of evaluation so that they use the post in order to defend that. And it can also help you move through and towards the learning goals that you've established. Another good piece of advice for designing your discussion board would be to choose the way that your discussion prompts will thread carefully. For example, if you want to thread by time, or if you want to thread by topic, and also if you want to restrict your students' abilities to create their own threads so that students can find the conversation where it needs to be, and that organization can bring some of its own actual cognitive effects to helping them structure their understanding of the conversation. If you have never facilitated an asynchronous discussion before, you may not be aware of what your discussion board facilitation preference style might be. However, you could look at your own communication patterns in your face-to-face classroom to guess, and you might just learn this as you go when you're getting familiar with this style. You might want to have frequent improvisational responses, or you could have a schedule where you know, yes, I am going to give improvisational responses, just read and respond. However, I'm only going to do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You might decide I'm going to have frequent structured responses. I may take a lecture that I used to give in class, write it down, split it up into those pieces of information that I know I would like to convey, and look for opportunities to put that information into the conversation, responding to what the students have asked for. You could do that in a scheduled way, and you could also decide if you wanted to do both. What I have developed over the years is sort of a formula to my approach to responding in the classroom. I do a very intensive style of response for the first week especially, to make sure that students know this is an important place to be and that my presence can be there to help them understand what is expected of them in their responses, by asking more probing questions or by showing praise for those posts that look exactly the way they should in the sense of their substance and quality. And then in week 2, I start to taper that off a little. And by the middle of the class, I've tried to turn the conversation over to the students so that my presence doesn't get in the way. And those expectations for the students are still expressed in the feedback they receive privately. And I'd like to make one final note about asynchronous discussion before I end this video, and that is that asynchronous discussions are a great place to help students with metacognition. And what is metacognition? That is what we think about how we think, or how students think about how they learn. Because the asynchronous discussion is a place of reflection where students can think about their learning process, it's a great way for you to bring that part of the learning process into a public space and into the conversation. They can self-assess their learning, they can do self-questioning and self-challenging, and you can use wrap-up strategies that will help them think about the thinking strategies they used to answer questions. If you ask students, for example, did you go to your textbook first before you answered the prompt, or did you start answering the prompt and then go to your textbook? Did you first think about your personal experiences? These types of conversations can help them experiment with new ways. It can also encourage them to answer the questions more fully by bringing in the conversation about textbooks and personal experiences, and it should help the learning stick.